A CEO was used to making high-stakes decisions, the kind that built an empire. But one night, during a routine dinner at his own restaurant with an investor, he noticed a quiet moment between a line cook and her son. It wasn't dramatic, just real. Something about it stuck with him. He followed that feeling and realized that building a great company first means taking care of the people who hold it up. Before we begin, what does success mean to you? Your answer might change after this story. Julian Brooks wasn't the kind of CEO who made a habit of visiting individual locations, at least not anymore. Those days were behind him, or so he thought. Once upon a time, when Savory Roots was just a fledgling concept and not yet the sprawling Southern cuisine empire it had become, Julian knew every creaking floorboard in every dining room. But these days his calendar was filled with boardroom meetings, investor calls, and quarterly strategy reviews. Decisions made far above the aroma of fried catfish and cornbread. Yet tonight, a dinner meeting with a potential investor had brought him back to the beginning. The Frenchman Street location wasn't just any restaurant. It was the first Savory Roots, nestled between a jazz bar and a vinyl shop, its windows fogged with warmth and spice, its walls soaked with the memories of 1,000 conversations. It had character. Peeling paint on the crown molding, mismatched chairs that no one had ever bothered to replace, and a menu that hadn't changed in 8 years because no one wanted it to. The kind of place where the sweet tea was poured before you asked and the waitstaff knew your name and your mother's favorite side dish. Julian had taken his seat at a back booth. Half present as his guest, a sleek-suited investor from New York raved about profit margins and expansion into luxury food halls. Julian smiled politely, nodded at the right moments, even offered a few calculated statistics, but someone, caught his attention from the edge of the dining floor. Near the open kitchen, behind the counter where orders slid through on greasy slips of paper, a woman stood with her back partially turned. She was bent slightly, speaking to a young boy no older than 6, who sat on a worn stool by the supply shelves. He looked sleepy, a little too small for his clothes, his socks mismatched and shoes scuffed to the thread. The woman crouched briefly to his level, her hand cupping the back of his head with practiced tenderness. He mumbled something and she smiled, reaching into her apron to pull out a small cookie wrapped in napkin. Then she draped a faded jacket over his shoulders and kissed the top of his head before standing again and returning to the grill without missing a beat. Julian watched the entire exchange like a scene from a film he hadn't meant to see. It wasn't grand. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. Unremarkable, maybe, to anyone else. But not to him. The investor kept talking. Numbers, rollout schedules, brand alignments. Julian's eyes didn't leave the woman. Something about the moment lingered in his chest, catching just behind his ribs. She moved like someone who knew every second counted. Her steps were brisk, her gestures efficient. She passed plates, adjusted timers, nodded to coworkers without ever breaking rhythm. There was something about her, a gravity, a stillness in the way she held herself despite the chaos around her. After dessert was served, a bread pudding soaked in bourbon, caramel, and nostalgia, Julian asked the manager to join them briefly. The investor had stepped away to take a call, and Julian leaned in quietly. "The woman on the grill?" he said. "With the boy? What's her name?" The manager blinked, then smiled. "That's Rosa Daniels, been with us 3 years, never missed a shift, never called out. She's solid, keeps to herself, always brings her kid during the evening shift, doesn't cause problems." Julian nodded, his gaze drifting back to Rosa, who was now plating fried green tomatoes with the kind of precision that came only from repetition. The boy, Kingston, he'd later learn, had fallen asleep, head against the shelf, the jacket she'd given him sliding down one arm. It was almost 9 o'clock, too late for any child to be here, too long a day for any parent to work through. He said nothing as the investor returned and the check was signed. He thanked the staff, offered a polite goodbye, and stepped outside into the humid New Orleans air. But he didn't head for his car. He waited, leaning against the side of the building, eyes flicking back through the window at the little boy still asleep, the mother still moving behind a cloud of steam and orders. He hadn't come here tonight to be moved. He hadn't expected to feel anything beyond the usual mix of strategic detachment and professional obligation. But Rosa Daniels had stirred something. He checked his watch. It was nearly closing time. And for the first time in a long while, Julian Brooks didn't feel like going home. He wanted to see where she went after the lights dimmed and the tables were wiped down. He wanted to understand what it meant to be Rosa Daniels in a company he had built and believed he knew. Something about tonight was different, and he couldn't walk away from it. Julian waited beneath the flickering glow of a cracked neon sign that read "Home Cooked Since '98, his hands tucked deep into the pockets of his slate-gray suit, the weight of a decision he hadn't named yet pressing against his chest. The night air was thick with the scent of frying oil and overgrown jasmine, the remnants of a southern summer refusing to let go. Inside the restaurant, chairs were being flipped onto tables, mops swished across tile, and lights dimmed room by room. He could see her, Rosa Daniels, gathering her things, wiping down her station one final time, her apron folded with meticulous care. The little boy stirred as she approached, eyes barely open, lids heavy with the sleep of children who've waited too long for grown-ups to finish working. She lifted him gently, like she'd done it 1,000 times before, one arm supporting his weight while the other swung a beat-up canvas backpack over her shoulder. Kingston nestled into her collarbone without a word. Rosa's face was unreadable, neither weary nor energized, just steady, composed. Survival didn't often leave room for dramatic expressions. She pushed the back door open with her hip and stepped out into the alley, the sudden chill causing the boy to whimper softly. She adjusted his jacket without looking up. Julian stepped forward slowly, deliberately. "Miss Daniels?" She froze for half a second before turning to face him. Her expression didn't show fear, but it did show surprise, the kind of guarded awareness that comes from working in places where people with power don't usually linger after hours. "Mr. Brooks," she said evenly, shifting Kingston's weight without letting him wake. "Didn't expect to see you out here." "I figured," Julian replied. "Mind if I walk you to your stop?" She blinked once, long and slow, as if calculating the safest way to answer. "It's just a few blocks down," she said. "We're used to it." "I don't doubt that," he said quietly. "But you shouldn't have to be." She didn't respond right away. Her eyes flicked to the street, to the cracked sidewalk, to the silence of the neighborhood after hours. The restaurants were closing, the bars hadn't yet started filling. It was the in-between hour where people disappeared into themselves and left the streets hollow. Julian tried again. "Please, let me give you both a ride. It's not about charity, I'd like to talk." Rosa hesitated, her arms tightening slightly around her son. "About what?" He didn't offer a rehearsed line. He wasn't sure what to say. "About what I saw tonight." For a moment she looked like she might refuse. She was proud, he could see that. Not the kind of pride that flaunted itself, but the quiet, sturdy kind. The kind that made a woman carry a sleeping child through 3 shifts and still finish every task before clocking out. Finally she gave a small nod, her voice low. "All right, but just to the corner. If it feels wrong, I'm out." "Fair enough," Julian said, gesturing toward the black SUV parked across the alley. His driver, Calvin, was already at the curb, engine idling, music low. Inside the car, Kingston remained asleep, curled into his mother's side as if the movement hadn't disturbed him at all. Rosa sat upright, her spine straight, eyes wary but not hostile. She held her backpack tightly in her lap, fingers gripping the frayed strap as if it might hold her steady. Julian waited a beat before speaking. "I noticed how you handled yourself tonight, not just in the kitchen, with him, with everything. You're impressive." Rosa let out a short breath, almost a laugh. "I don't know if I'd call it that." "I would," Julian said. A pause stretched between them, filled only by the hum of the car and the soft snore of a child lost in dreams. Julian studied her face. The lines near her mouth, the fatigue beneath her eyes, the steel behind her gaze. "Do you bring him to every shift?" he asked softly. She nodded. "Evenings, yeah. No daycare that late. And I can't afford a sitter every time." He tilted his head. "No one ever said anything?" She shrugged. "They know. Some of them look the other way. Some ask questions, but I do my job. Always have." Julian leaned back slightly. Why didn't you ever ask for help? Rosa met his eyes squarely. Because I didn't think it would matter. And I wasn't raised to expect anything for free. There it was. That quiet defiance, that unshakable integrity. It made his chest tighten in a way he hadn't expected. This wasn't about policy. It wasn't about corporate image or HR protocols. This was about people. The kind who showed up every day, did the work, never made noise, and yet built the very foundation his company stood on. "What's your son's name?" he asked after a moment. "Kingston." "He's lucky to have you." Her jaw tightened, not out of anger but emotion too long buried. "He doesn't need luck," she said. "He needs stability, safety, food in the fridge, a place to sleep where no one's banging on the walls." Julian swallowed. "And you give him that?" "Barely," she replied. "But I try." They rode in silence for a few more blocks. As they neared a turnoff past a row of dimly lit auto shops, Rosa gave a quiet direction. "Next right." Julian gestured for Calvin to follow. "I know this might sound strange," he said gently, "but would it be all right if I saw where you live? I'm not here to judge, I just—" He paused, searching for the words. "I want to understand what your life actually looks like when the kitchen lights go off." Rosa stared at him. The streetlights played across her face like shadows on water. She didn't answer right away. She looked at Kingston, at the backpack in her lap, at the window where the world rolled past as if none of this mattered. Then she turned to him again. "Just for a minute," she said, "and only if you stay outside." Julian nodded. Deep, because he hadn't come this far just to guess at the truth. He had come to witness it. The SUV slowed as they turned off the main road, the hum of the city giving way to a quieter kind of decay-uneven pavement, sagging streetlights, chain-linked fences curling like paper at the corners. Rows of low-rise apartment buildings stood in tired silence, their brickwork stained with years of rain and neglect. A few windows glowed faintly behind threadbare curtains, but most were dark. It was the kind of neighborhood that didn't show up in tourist guides, the kind where people worked too much and slept too little, and nobody knocked on your door unless they had a reason. Rosa leaned forward slightly, her voice barely above a whisper, as she gestured toward a narrow walkway between two buildings. "Down there. Ground floor, third unit from the back." Elijah eased the car to a stop. Rosa reached for the door handle, then hesitated. "You can wait here," she said, her tone soft but firm. "I'll only be a minute." Julian nodded. "Take your time." She stepped out, cradling Kingston in her arms like a second heartbeat. The child stirred just once, letting out a small sigh before settling again against her shoulder. Julian watched as she moved toward the building with quiet familiarity, her figure illuminated by the flickering security light above the walkway entrance. The paint on the door frames was chipped, the handrails rusted through in places, and the stairs leading to the upper floor sagged under the weight of their own neglect. She reached the door and tapped gently. It opened almost immediately. Inside, the glow of a single overhead bulb spilled into the night, revealing a girl, maybe 11, maybe 12, standing in the doorway barefoot holding a school workbook. Her braids were uneven, her hoodie 2 sizes too big. Rosa smiled at her and whispered something Julian couldn't hear. The girl nodded and stepped aside. Rosa disappeared inside, the door easing shut behind her with a click that felt louder than it should have in a place like this. Julian sat in the back seat, silent, hands folded in his lap. The windows fogged faintly with condensation. He could smell the trace of fried food still clinging to his collar, but his mind wasn't in the restaurant anymore. It was here, behind these thin walls and worn-out doors, trying to piece together a life he'd only glimpsed in passing. 10 minutes passed, then 15. He saw a shadow move behind the curtain, then another, and then the door opened again. Julian stepped out of the car, not to intrude, but because something inside him demanded more than observation. He needed to be present. Just to see. Rosa emerged onto the stoop, her hair slightly damp, her sleeves rolled up. Behind her, the girl, Maya, he presumed, stood in the doorway, holding a dish towel in one hand. There was a third figure now, too, slumped in a recliner just beyond the narrow hallway, an older woman, her legs wrapped in bandages, a portable oxygen tank humming softly beside her. Rosa caught his eye and hesitated. Then she walked toward him, arms crossed, her voice low and measured. "I told them you were someone from work," she said. "Didn't say anything more." Julian nodded. "I understand. They don't need another promise from someone who won't stick around." "I'm not here to promise," he said, "just to see, if that's still all right." Rosa studied him for a long moment, then stepped to the side. "You can look from here." Julian approached the doorway, stopping at the threshold. The space was tight, every corner put to use. The floor was a patchwork of linoleum and duct tape. The kitchen, if it could be called that, was barely larger than a closet, with mismatched cabinets and a stovetop that looked older than the children. A small table with only 3 chairs sat in the center, cluttered with homework, pill bottles, a plastic tub of peanut butter, and an unopened letter from the state's housing authority. Maya moved silently through the space, opening the fridge with her elbow while still holding her schoolwork. Inside were a few containers of leftovers, a half-gallon of milk, and a single carton of eggs. The older woman in the recliner, "Mama Di?" Rosa had said in the car, glanced toward the door. Her voice was raspy but clear. "You the boss man?" Julian offered a small nod. "Yes, ma'am." She tilted her head slightly. "Well then, be kind to my girl. She ain't never asked for much." The words hit him harder than he expected. Rosa turned back to him, arms still folded, but voice a little softer now. "This is our life. I didn't bring you here for sympathy." "I didn't come for that," Julian said. He looked around again, at Maya still working, at the recliner patched with old quilts, at the stack of empty lunch boxes drying beside the sink. Every detail told a story, not one of failure, but of quiet resilience, of holding a family together with calloused hands and too little rest. "You're doing more than most people ever could," he said finally. Rosa shook her head. "I'm doing what I have to. That's not the same." Julian didn't argue. He just stood there, absorbing the truth in her words. She didn't want applause. She didn't even want help. What she needed, what she deserved, was to be seen, to be acknowledged, to know that the company she gave her labor to knew she existed beyond a punch clock and a payroll ID. As she walked him back to the curb, the porch light above them buzzed and dimmed. Kingston's toy, an action figure missing an arm, lay forgotten near the steps. Julian glanced back one last time at the doorway, still open, still waiting. "I appreciate you letting me see him," he said. Rosa gave a small nod, her eyes unreadable. "Most folks look the other way." "Maybe that's the problem," he replied. "Maybe we've been looking away too long." Then he stepped into the SUV, the door closing behind him with a quiet finality. He didn't tell Calvin to drive yet. He sat still, watching the flickering light above Rosa's door, the rusted metal railing, the dented mailbox, watching the place where a woman like Rosa Daniels lived, raised a family, held together a life, and wondered how many others like her existed in his system, invisible by design. And for the first time in his career, Julian Brooks didn't see numbers. He saw cost, real cost. And he knew. This wasn't the end of something. This was where it began. Julian didn't sleep that night. Not because of work, not because of strategy decks or board projections, but because every time he closed his eyes, he saw the image of Rosa standing under that flickering porch light, arms crossed, shoulders squared, a fortress built of fatigue and dignity. He saw the cramped apartment, the way Maya stirred a pot on the stove like she'd been doing it since she was 5, the way Mama D's swollen feet were propped on a cushion that had seen too many winters. The way Rosa, in the midst of all that need, still offered kindness without ever asking for anything back. And he saw Kingston asleep on the floor in the corner of the living room, wrapped in a superhero blanket that had more patches than color left. Julian sat in the quiet of his downtown condo, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city still glittering from the distance, and he wondered how a place could shine so brightly on the outside, while letting so many of its people go unseen. At 3:18 a.m. he opened his laptop, not for email, not for reports. He pulled up the internal HR system, typing Rosa Daniels into the search bar with deliberate precision. Her profile appeared, clean and unassuming. 3 years of employment, 0 complaints, 0 violations. Above average performance ratings, standard hourly rate. Julian stared at the salary line, then at the benefits column. There were none. No health insurance, no family support, no housing stipend, just time punches and paycheck logs that barely added up to survival. He clicked back. Rosa was just one name in a company of thousands. But something in his gut told him she wasn't an exception. She was the rule, the backbone, the overlooked, the very thing that had made Savory Roots what it was, yet never made it into the spreadsheet. He leaned back in his chair, rubbed his eyes, and reached for his phone. The call to Camille Hawthorne, VP of Human Resources, went straight to voicemail. Unsurprising at nearly 4 in the morning, he didn't leave a message. He didn't need to. She'd see the missed call and know it mattered. Next, he dialed Lionel Grant, the director of store operations. The line rang twice before a groggy voice picked up. "Julian, is everything okay?" "No," Julian said, his voice low, controlled, almost surgical in tone. "Everything is not okay." There was silence on the other end, then the shuffling of sheets. "Talk to me." Julian stood, walking to the window, watching headlights trace the roads below. "I visited Frenchman Street tonight. Rosa Daniels, she works the grill." "Sure," Lionel said, cautious now. "Hard worker, quiet, always gets the job done." "She brings her child to work," Julian continued, "because she can't afford childcare. She takes double shifts so her family has food. She lives in a 2-room apartment with 3 other people and a broken stove. And our company, my company, pays her just enough to almost survive." Lionel was quiet for a beat. Then, "Julian, I know we've got folks in tough spots, but we've also got budgets, metrics. If we raise one, we raise all. It's a slippery—" Julian cut him off. "Stop. Don't say slippery slope. Don't tell me about margins. I've seen the numbers. We spent 6 figures on executive retreats this year. We upgraded our boardroom chairs. We spent $15,000 on monogrammed dinnerware for our holiday gala. We have money. What we don't have is a conscience." Lionel exhaled. "Okay, so what do you want to do?" Julian turned from the window. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "First, we implement an immediate wage review. Any employee below a livable threshold gets a raise, starting with kitchen and service staff. I want those numbers by the end of the week." "Got it." "Second," he continued, "starting tomorrow, every location will designate a small corner for employees' children. Quiet space, a chair, an outlet, even a coloring book if that's all we can manage. No more kids sleeping on crate boxes in storage rooms. I want it in every unit plan by Monday." Lionel was wide awake now. "All right, that's gonna take some coordination." "Then coordinate," Julian snapped. "Loop in facilities, reallocate space, partner with local nonprofits if you have to. Make it work." "Understood." Julian paused. The next words came heavier. "Third, we're creating a family relief fund. Emergency grants, rent support, medical aid. If someone's keeping our business afloat, we owe them more than a pizza party and a thank you email." "Julian, that's big." "I know exactly how big it is," he said. "And I'm telling you, we start now." Lionel didn't argue. He just said quietly, "All right, I'll wake the right people." Julian ended the call, his thumb lingering on the screen before locking the phone and setting it down on the marble counter. Outside, the horizon was beginning to shift from black to navy blue, the earliest edge of dawn stretching over rooftops and telephone wires. He didn't move. He didn't need to. The next move had already begun. This wasn't a reaction, it wasn't guilt, it wasn't charity. It was leadership. It was justice. Long overdue. Julian Brooks wasn't just going to patch the cracks. He was going to rebuild the foundation. Because Rosa Daniels wasn't a story to inspire change, she was the reason change was mandatory. And come morning, everyone at the top was going to know it. The boardroom was already half full by the time Julian Brooks walked in. His suit a crisp navy that matched the weight in his eyes, his presence unmistakably different from the man they were used to seeing. The early morning light poured through the wall of glass behind him, washing over polished wood and chrome fixtures, bathing the sleek space in gold. Coffee steamed in tall ceramic mugs, laptops glowed with charts, budgets, projections. Department heads murmured quietly, flipping through printed reports, glancing up only when Julian crossed the room and placed both palms flat on the edge of the table. He didn't sit. He didn't offer pleasantries. He simply looked out over the room with a gaze that told them the usual rules no longer applied. "We have a problem," he said. The room stilled instantly. Chairs shifted, eyes locked in. Camille Hawthorne, HR, sat upright. Lionel Grant, Director of Ops, had already placed his phone face down. The new VP of Brand Strategy, a man who had just flown in from San Francisco, looked mildly amused, not yet understanding the tone. Julian's voice didn't rise, but it carried weight, the kind that made even the HVAC system seem to hush. "Last night I visited Frenchman Street," he said. "I met Rosa Daniels. Some of you may know her, some of you probably don't. She's worked the grill there for 3 years, no complaints, no call-outs. Brings her son to work every evening because she has no other choice. Lives in a 1-bedroom apartment with her daughter, her mother, and her son. Her refrigerator's half empty, her body's running on fumes, and we pay her, one of our most reliable employees, less than what it costs to survive in this city." He paused. The silence grew louder. "I sat in her living room," he went on. "I saw her daughter reheating dinner on a stove that barely works. I saw a woman who hasn't missed a shift in over 1,000 days skip her own dinner so her children could eat. I saw what it looks like when a person gives everything to a system that never thought to give anything back." Camille looked stricken, her jaw tight, fingers interlaced as if holding in words. Julian gave her a nod, not unkind, then turned to the room again. "This is not just about Rosa. Rosa is one name, but there are hundreds, maybe thousands like her, people we've overlooked because they don't complain, because they don't make noise, because they show up every day and do the damn job, and we've convinced ourselves that showing up is thanks enough." The new VP raised a hand slightly, a polite interruption. "Julian, I understand the urgency here, but any significant wage overhaul, especially across multiple tiers, requires review, budget modeling, timeline planning. This is a complex shift." Julian's eyes found him. Calm, unmoving. "Complex is a vacation package. Complex is our Christmas party budget. Feeding a child isn't complex, and if our systems can't accommodate dignity, then we're building the wrong system." Angela Wu, the VP of Field Operations, sharp-eyed and never afraid to speak, leaned forward, her voice low but firm. "I've met Rosa. She trained half the night crew when I was shadowing last year. I didn't know about her family, but I remember how the kitchen ran smoother when she was there." She looked around the table. "She's not an outlier. She's the standard we build on and forget." Julian nodded once. "Exactly." He turned to Camille. "Effective immediately, I want a 40% increase for any employee currently earning under a livable wage. Retroactive to the start of this fiscal quarter. Department heads will work with you to identify these roles, but you have my authority to execute. If we need to trim from executive bonuses, do it." Camille blinked. "Julian, that's going to impact more than just payroll. We're talking about full-scale recalibration." "I'm aware," he said, his tone cool, "and I'll carry the responsibility for it publicly. If shareholders ask, they can talk to me." He didn't slow down. "Second, starting next week, every location needs to have a designated space for employees' children. I don't care if it's a break room corner with a beanbag and an outlet. No more kids waiting on milk crates behind a fryer." Lionel raised his hand halfway. "We'll need to audit square footage. Some stores are tight." "Then get creative," Julian said. "We've found room for kombucha taps in the Chicago location. We can find room for a child to sit safely." A nervous chuckle died in someone's throat. "Third," Julian said, voice steadying into something deeper, quieter, more dangerous in its calm, "we're creating a family relief fund, rent emergencies, medical crises, childcare. I want a formal framework, vetting process, and resource guide by end of month. Jacob Lang, the CFO, finally spoke. That's a lot of capital movement. I'm not saying we can't do it, but this is a dramatic philosophical shift. We've operated under a lean model for years. Julian's eyes flashed. And we've leaned on the backs of people who had no choice. That ends now. This company isn't just a food brand, it's a community. If we can't prove that in how we treat the people who make the food, we've failed. He looked around the room, letting his words settle like dust after demolition. No one in this company should be able to afford a summer home while their grill cook can't afford dinner. There it was. No one moved, no one responded. Because what was there to say? They had all read the reports, seen the margins, discussed expansion into new markets. But no one had ever asked how Rosa Daniels got to work each day, or what her child ate at night, or how many corners she had folded herself into just to make a life within the walls they owned. Julian took a breath, not triumphant, just resolved. You have 48 hours to bring me drafts, policy, logistics, budget lines. We move fast because the problem is now. If this company has grown large enough to forget who built it, then it's time we shrink our comfort until we remember. He stepped back from the table, the room still holding its collective breath. If anyone here believes this is the wrong direction, he said, you're welcome to leave. I won't hold it against you. But no one moved. Because somewhere, deep down, even those clinging to their spreadsheets and profit curves knew Julian Brooks wasn't leading a company anymore. He was leading a reckoning. The change didn't come with press releases or branded campaigns. There were no ribbon-cutting ceremonies or camera crews documenting the rollout, but in every Savory Roots kitchen something shifted. It was in the extra chair set in the corner where a child could color while waiting for their mother to finish the dinner rush. It was in the envelopes quietly handed to employees, new pay rates, back pay, a note that simply read, "Thank you for what you carry." It was in the look of disbelief on faces used to being overlooked. Rosa Daniels returned to work the following Monday, unaware of the storm she'd stirred into motion. But she knew something was different the moment her manager called her into the office and handed her a sealed letter. Inside was a raise, a retroactive bonus, a new benefits package. She stared at it for a long time, her fingers trembling slightly, her lips parted in silent confusion. I don't understand," she whispered. Her manager smiled, sliding a small card across the desk. On the front was Julian's name, on the back a handwritten message. "This should have happened a long time ago. Thank you for being the foundation the rest of us forgot." That night, Rosa walked home with Kingston's hand in hers, Maya running ahead to unlock the door. She didn't cry, not because it wasn't overwhelming, but because there wasn't time. There were dishes to wash, homework to check, her mother's medicine to sort. Life didn't pause just because something good finally happened. But as she stood in the kitchen, the sound of her children laughing down the hall, Rosa allowed herself one small breath of peace. For the first time in years, she didn't have to ration dinner. She didn't have to pretend she'd already eaten. She could just be. And Julian? He didn't go back to normal. He couldn't. He kept showing up, not for meetings, but for people. He walked kitchens, sat with janitors, listened to dishwashers. He knew their names, knew their birthdays, knew that change wasn't a speech, it was consistency. It was policy written in sweat and humility. He never spoke Rosa's name to the press, never used her story as a marketing asset, because it wasn't about heroism, it was about repair. Success, he had once believed, was expansion, recognition, influence. But standing outside that trailer beneath a flickering porch light, with the sound of a child's laughter drifting into the street, Julian Brooks had learned something new. Success isn't what you build above people. It's what you build with them. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.